All right, guys, this is your how to write an introduction video. Please note you do not need to do any writing of your introduction at home. That is what Monday's class period is for. So please just watch this video and write a summary of some of the terminology that I use, of some of the different ways that you have to choose from, which is in this list right in front of you, some of those ways that you have to choose from to maybe start your introduction for your narrative essay. So looking at this list, you can start your hook or your introduction for your narrative through describing unusual people, places, or things, creating a metaphor, establishing juxtaposition, which I'm going to tell you about that in a moment, telling a joke, which also would then in turn establish a conversation with your reader, create drama, establish irony, which would be something that you start with that might surprise your reader after you get to the main point of your story, making an outlandish statement, or telling a personal anecdote that is separate from the event that you're writing about. So you're already telling an anecdote, so to speak, a very extended one in your narrative. In your introduction, you would tell a very short 3 to 5 sentence anecdote that introduces the next full story. So juxtaposition is taking two unlike things, placing them together in a story to draw attention to the differences. So you want to take two separate things, maybe winter and summer, those are two opposites, put them together for a purpose, to explain maybe how people have difficulty transitioning from one season to the next. You might be talking about a negative event in your life in your story, but maybe you're going to start with a positive event to show how things were and how you changed from the event you're writing about. And then you have the anecdote, which I kind of already talked about, which is that short personal story that's separate from your main story. It's just an introductive story, 3 to 5 sentences long. And finally, please do not start with a question or a quotation, because these are ways that younger writers are taught, but now we're working towards advancing our writing skills. So this entire year, I will ask you guys not to use questions and not to use quotations. This note might be worth putting into your summary for today's video. Okay, so let's look at some examples here. The first example is an introduction written by David Sedaris, Memento Mori. For the past 10 years or so, I've made it a habit to carry a small notebook in my front pocket. The model I favor is called the Europa, and I pull it out on an average of 10 times a day, jotting down grocery lists, observations, and little thoughts on how to make money or torment people. The last page is always reserved for phone numbers, and the second to last I use for gift ideas. These are not things that I might give to other people, but things that they might give to me. A shoehorn, for instance. Always wanted one. The same goes for a pencil case, which, on the low end, probably costs no more than a donut. So then after you read examples, you need to ask yourself, what did they do that I can learn from? How can I become a better writer by looking at this person's example? So some of the things that you can notice is this kind of generic way of starting, but it would work probably for most of you if you're looking for a way to start your intro without a quote or a question for the past 10 years or so. He has a very conversational tone, so that's another thing that you might want to put into your notes, is a conversational tone would be necessary for a narrative piece. It brings the tone and the voice alive in your essay. He also used some different ways of punctuation. He used a colon and he used a dash. Again, that brings that more conversational tone to play. Please do not put dot, 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 dot like you would when you text. Don't use that type of punctuation, but colons and listing or dashes. Dashes might symbolize where you might add in something that you would have normally said after a pause. So let's look at the second one. I'd like for you to read A Son Returns to the Agony of Somalia to yourself. Reading it to yourself, ask yourself, what has this author done that I can learn from? What has he done for creating an effective introduction? Please begin. So after you've read this to yourself, and if you did not have enough time, just pause me, keep reading, and then unpause when you're ready to continue. But this author used a lot of literary terms, a lot of literary devices, and I don't know if you noticed that as you read. If you pause me right now and reread, you might be able to practice identifying those if you didn't see them already. Now, what did he use? The beating heart of my story. Metaphor. What else has he used here? He has used death approaching from a distance is walking into our lives. Personification. He said a childhood filled with poetry from renowned relatives. He's talking about all the stories that people have told him. He's calling it poetry, so this could be a metaphor because they weren't technically writing poems. Less like a presence in the chest and more like an x-ray of it. He has used a simile. So using literary terms is another way that you might be able to liven up your introduction. We have two more examples. Shadow over me. For the first 12 years of my life, I was a happy child who enjoyed the companionship of friends and had no worries. Then one day in 7th grade, during my math class, that all changed thanks to a conversation I had with Brandon Capesi, a guy that I first met a few years before on a 5th grade class camping trip. He told me I was unpopular. So this writer starts with a bit of an anecdote and is getting into the point of what is the shadow in her life. So she kind of tells a mini story. We also know that because she talks about shadow, something negative is going to be in her story, but she starts with, I was a happy child. That's where she juxtaposes the idea of darkness and happiness. So this is another example you might use. The final one I'll have you read to yourself again. Maybe pause this now and read it to yourself and ask yourself, what has this author done that is a good example of writing? Please begin reading now. Okay. If you're not done reading, go ahead and pause and complete the reading. You need to ask yourself what this author did, and don't just sit there and not think and wait for me to give you the answers. Your brain has to be processing. So please process, what did they do? Try in your own mind now to either underline or highlight on your computer, or maybe just in your mind, what did they do that makes this effective? If you looked at the listing, that's one thing they did that's effective. The repetition of the phrases I still, I knew, seems simplistic, but it's done for a purpose, creates the rhythm. The very short sentences in the very first line, I didn't want to go, I knew I didn't want to go when I woke up, that also tells us that it gets us right to the point. So, as you can see, these are ways that you can create a strong introduction for your story on Monday. If you need to write down a few of these will be used for discussion. Please at this time write your summary and ask a question regarding how you can write a strong introduction for your essay. Again, majority of the class time on Monday will be used for writing, so please come prepared to start writing. Do not do it this weekend. All your weekend homework was to listen to me for these 9 minutes. Have a good rest of your weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.